Welcome to Mind Set in Stone podcasts, where we dive deep into the most compelling books on the shelf. Join hosts Dave and Poppy as they uncover the stories, themes, and ideas that shape our understanding and inspire curiosity. Get ready to explore the big ideas that leave a lasting impact. Let's get started.
Welcome back, deep divers. Ready to explore something truly fascinating?
I am.
Today, we're all about creativity. That spark of genius. That aha moment.
That thing that makes us, well, human.
Exactly. And we've got a wild mix of sources to dive into.
Yeah. Like what?
Well, we're going from hardcore neuroscience, you know, how our brains make connections,
Right.
to a paper about how artistic taste evolved, all the way to a case study of a painter who had dementia.
Wow. Okay, that's quite the range. So what's the mission? What are we hoping to learn?
Get ready for some serious aha moments. You might just see your own creative process totally differently.
Love it. Let's get into it.
So to kick things off, we got to define creativity. It's more than just, that fuzzy feel-good idea.
Yeah, I mean, what does think outside the box even mean?
Right. We're going deeper than that. We're talking about the nuts and bolts of how it works in our brains.
Okay, love the nuts and bolts approach. So where do we start?
Well, first, we got to acknowledge something. Creativity isn't just one thing.
Oh, interesting. You're saying there are, different types of creativity.
Exactly. And each type might even have, its own neural signature.
Okay, I'm hooked.
Yeah.
Tell me more about these types.
All right, let's start with one we all know. Combinational creativity. This is the classic blending ideas thing.
Oh, I get it. Like peanut butter meets chocolate, you get a Reese's.
Exactly, the classic example.
So what's next?
Okay, then there's exploratory creativity. You're working within an existing framework, but you're pushing those boundaries.
Okay. So like a jazz musician improvising on a melody.
Yes. Or a chef riffing on a classic recipe, using new ingredients but sticking to the structure.
They're playing within the rules, but finding fresh ways to express themselves. Got it.
Exactly. So it's not always about inventing something totally new from scratch.
Right.
But it's about finding those new ways to express something that's already out there.
Makes sense. So what's the last type?
All right, now for the big one. The most radical form of creativity, transformational creativity.
Ooh, radical. I like it. Tell me more.
This is where the rules get completely thrown out. Think Einstein's theory of relativity.
Whoa.
Or Picasso's cubism.
Yeah, okay. Those are serious game changers, shifting the whole paradigm.
Exactly. So while you're listening, think about it. Which type do you use most often? It's kind of fascinating to consider.
It is, but, there's another point we have to address.
What's that?
Real creativity. It isn't random.
What do you mean?
Well, there's this principle of relevance that seems to be at the heart of it.
Relevance. So it's not just about throwing ideas out there and seeing what sticks.
Nope. Take Proust's famous Madeleine, for example. That sensory experience that triggers a flood of memories.
Yeah.
It might seem random, but those memories are deeply relevant to Proust's life and experiences.
Oh, I see. It's not just any random smell or taste triggering those memories.
Right. The smell and taste of that Madeleine held a very specific meaning for him.
So our brains aren't just pulling random ideas out of thin air. There's a filtering process going on where only the relevant stuff gets through. But how does our brain figure out what's relevant so fast? That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's one that neuroscientists are still, grappling with.
Right. I mean, how does the brain sift through a lifetime of experiences and pull up the relevant stuff in a split second? It's almost like magic.
It really is. And speaking of magic, one of our sources, Gabora and Ranjan, they actually use that analogy to describe how insights pop up.
Well, I like where this is going.
They talk about our memories working like these giant, messy webs of interconnected ideas.
Giant, messy webs. I can picture it.
Right. It's like a vast neural network. Not neat files, but a tangled jungle of thoughts and experiences.
Okay, yeah, that's a much better image.
And it's what we call content addressable. You think of one thing, and boom, related stuff pops up automatically.
Okay, give me an example.
Sure. Like if I say beach, what comes to mind?
Sand, ocean, sunburn.
See? Content addressable memory at work. But how does this lead to those aha moments, those creative insights?
That's the question, isn't it?
Well, each idea in that network is represented by a bunch of tiny details, almost like a constellation of what we call microfeatures.
Microfeatures.
Yeah. Similar ideas, they share some of these microfeatures.
Yeah.
So when we have a creative insight, it's because our brain found an overlap in those microfeatures between ideas that seem totally unrelated.
Okay, I need a concrete example. I'm a big picture person, you know that, but I need those specifics to really get it.
Sure. Imagine someone wants a cheap window covering, right? They don't want to buy curtains.
Okay, I've been there.
They're thinking about paint, and suddenly, bam, the idea for curtain paint hits them.
Curtain paint, I love it. So they connected to seemingly totally random ideas and came up with something new.
Exactly. That's how those aha moments happen. And that's actually how those different types of creativity work too.
Oh, how so?
The degree of overlap in those microfeatures.
So, like, a lot of overlap.
That's more exploratory creativity. You're working within familiar territory.
But if there's just a little overlap in some unusual features...
That's when you get those transformative, outside-the-box breakthroughs.
That's amazing.
It is, right. Our brains are incredible. You know, thinking about these neural networks and all those tiny microfeatures, it really makes you realize how complex this whole creative process is.
It does.
And it raises some interesting questions about the link between creativity and, well, what some might call unconventional brains.
You're talking about the whole creativity and mental illness thing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like that classic stereotype, the tortured artist. But is there any truth to that?
It's complicated. We got to be careful here. I mean, we're not saying all creative people are dealing with mental illness.
Right.
Or the other way around.
Correlation, not causation.
Exactly. It's more about understanding that some mental illnesses and creativity, they might share some underlying vulnerabilities.
Okay, interesting. Like, what kinds of vulnerabilities are we talking about?
Well, imagine two cities on a map, right?
Okay.
They're different places, but they might share some of the same roads or infrastructure.
Oh, I like that analogy. So what are the shared roads when it comes to creativity and mental illness?
One fascinating example is this thing called reduced latent inhibition.
Reduced latent what now?
It's a mouthful. Basically, it means people with this trait are less likely to filter out information from their environment.
Oh, interesting. So they're taking in more of everything.
Exactly. More sights, more sounds, more data, the whole shebang.
So they're experiencing the world in a more intense way.
Exactly. Now, for some people, this can be overwhelming, even debilitating.
Oh, I can see that.
It can lead to conditions like schizophrenia where it all becomes too much to process.
Right. But for others?
For others, it could fuel their creativity.
It's like a double-edged sword.
Exactly. Imagine having a wider lens, a more sensitive antenna for picking up those subtle connections and patterns that other people miss.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, a lot of creative breakthroughs come from seeing things in a new way.
Right. Making connections that nobody else has made before.
So reduced latent inhibition could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on the person.
But that's a great way to put it. And there's actually a study that supports this.
Oh, tell me about it.
Researchers looked at people who were adopted and whose biological parents had schizophrenia.
Okay.
Even if the adoptees themselves didn't develop schizophrenia, they were still more likely to be creative.
Whoa, really? Compared to people without that family history?
Yes. So it suggests that there's a genetic component to this link.
Fascinating. But like you said before, genes aren't destiny.
Exactly. There's more to it than that. Environment, personal experiences, even personality.
Makes sense.
For example, people with high IQs and good cognitive flexibility, they seem better at handling all that extra information.
It's like they have a mental safety net to help them navigate those creative waters.
Exactly. It's not just about having that creative brain. It's about having the tools to actually use it effectively.
I love that. Which brings us to a really remarkable case study.
Oh, you mean the story of Anne Adams?
Yes. This one was so interesting. Can you set the scene for our listeners who haven't read about her?
Sure. Anne Adams developed semantic dementia.
Semantic dementia.
It's a neurodegenerative disease, affects language and conceptual knowledge.
So, like, what does that mean in everyday life?
Well, people with this condition gradually lose the ability to understand words, objects, even familiar faces.
Oh, wow. That sounds heartbreaking.
It is. But here's what's amazing. Even as Anne's language declined, she started expressing herself in a new way through art.
Really? Through art?
Yep. She began creating these incredibly detailed paintings.
So as she lost her words, she found her art.
You got it. And we're not talking about simple doodles here. These were intricate, full of life. Amazing, really.
I wish we had visuals for this deep dive. Can you describe one for our listeners, just so they can picture it?
Okay, sure. One of her later pieces was this swirling galaxy.
A galaxy.
Yeah, full of stars and planets, vibrant colors, incredible details. All this while her language was severely impaired.
That's powerful. It really shows you how art can go beyond words. It's a whole different level of communication.
It is.
But what was happening in Anne's brain? How could she create these amazing pieces while losing her language?
Well, researchers studied her brain and found something incredible.
What was it?
Even though she had dementia, which causes brain degeneration, there was actually an increase in volume in the areas related to visual attention and processing.
Wait, so parts of her brain were declining, but other areas were becoming more active?
Exactly. And this increased activity seemed directly linked to her art.
Like her brain was finding a new way to express itself, even as her language faded.
That's a fascinating way to think about it. It's almost like there was some kind of neural rewiring going on.
Right, like compensating for the loss by boosting other areas.
It really highlights how adaptable the brain is. Even with those challenges, it finds new ways to create, to connect, to thrive.
It's a beautiful testament to the human spirit, Even with loss and decline, we can still grow and express ourselves.
Absolutely. It makes you wonder if creativity is a kind of survival mechanism, a way to find meaning even when things are tough.
Wow. That's deep. And it makes me think, is this creative spark, this drive to create, is it unique to humans, or is it out there in the animal kingdom too?
That is a great question, and one that scientists have been exploring for a long time.
So what have they found? Are we the only creative ones on this planet?
Not at all. There's a lot of research suggesting that creativity is much more widespread than we think. It might be a fundamental part of life itself.
Wow, really?
Yeah, and it might go way back in our evolutionary history. A key part of survival and adaptation, not just for humans, but for many other species too.
Okay, I'm hooked. Give me some examples. Where do we see this animal ingenuity?
Well, one thing we see is that in lots of species, bigger brains seem to go hand in hand with more innovation. It's like having more space up there lets them do more complex problem solving, more creative thinking.
So bigger brain, bigger ideas. Okay, that tracks. But what about specific examples? What kind of creative stuff can animals actually do?
Take crows, for instance. I mean, everyone knows they're smart, but they're also seriously resourceful.
Right.
Like inventive.
I've seen videos of them using tools and things. It's crazy.
Right. Researchers have seen them doing stuff like bending a wire to make a hook so they can get a treat out of a container.
They really do seem to have a knack for, figuring things out, problem solving.
Exactly. And it's not just crows. Chimps use sticks to fish for termites. They've even been seen cracking nuts with rocks.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is. And it's not just instinct either. It takes real creativity, that ability to adapt and think of a solution. It's pretty remarkable.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? It's like they're not just reacting to the world around them. They're actively shaping it, using their creativity to overcome challenges. It puts things in perspective, like how special is our human ingenuity, really?
It does. And it shows that creativity, this isn't some highfalutin concept, it's a basic part of life itself.
Yeah.
It's a driving force behind survival, behind evolution. And it's not just us humans who have it.
That's a really powerful takeaway. Creativity is woven into life itself. It's not just a human thing.
Exactly.
Before we wrap up, though, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier. Art. We've been in the science of creativity, but what about the RT of it? How do artists tap into all this brain stuff, those neural networks, to create works that really hit us in the feels?
Ah, that's a great question. I mean, it's one thing to understand the process in our heads.
Yeah.
But it's something else entirely to see it come out in art that moves us, inspires us, changes how we see the world.
Exactly. So how do they do it? What's the secret?
Well, if there were one secret, everyone would be a Michelangelo. But I think a big part of it is artists know how to use different tools, different techniques. It's about skill, really.
Okay, I'm following. So in visual art, for instance.
Right. In painting, you've got line, shape, color, texture.
Right.
All those things can evoke certain emotions, certain ideas. It's not just what you're painting, it's how you're doing it.
Oh, interesting. Can you give an example?
Sure. There's this concept called figure and ground. Artists use it to create optical illusions, those visual puzzles that mess with your perception.
Ooh, like M.C. Escher.
Yes, exactly. His work is a perfect example. You can't tell what's in front and what's behind. It's like your brain is trying to catch up to what your eyes are seeing.
So cool. And in photography, you've got depth of field, making the subject sharp but the background blurry.
Right. It focuses your attention and makes it feel, I don't know, dreamy, like you're peeking into a moment in time.
I love that effect. And then there's cropping, juxtaposition.
Yeah, those can change how you perceive balance in the image, leading your eye through the artwork, creating harmony or tension, depending on what the artist wants.
It's like they're choreographing how we see the art, guiding us through it.
That's a perfect way to put it. All those techniques, the subtle ones, the big ones, they come together to make us feel that sense of wonder, of engagement, when we see a great piece of art.
It's a blend of skill and vision, huh?
Totally. And I think it shows how connected art is to all this creativity stuff we've been talking about.
Yeah, the creation, Annie, the appreciation of art, it all ties back to those same processes.
Absolutely. And I think it speaks volumes about the human mind. We don't just experience the world, we shape it, transform it, create something totally new and meaningful. It's amazing.
I gotta say, I'm feeling super inspired right now. This deep dive has been incredible. We've covered so much, the brain science behind aha moments, how creativity is part of evolution, even the techniques artists use to make us go, wow.
It's been quite a journey.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners? I think the biggest thing is creativity isn't some magic power that only a few people have. It's a process. It's in our brains. It's all around us in nature. And everyone has access to it.
And remember what Gabora and Ranjan said about those nerds always making new connections in our heads. What random ideas have you had lately? Those might be the seeds of something amazing. Don't ignore them. Explore them. You never know where they might lead.
Embrace those aha moments, keep that curiosity alive, and never stop exploring what your creative mind can do. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the neuroscience of creativity. We'll see you next time for another adventure in the world of knowledge.
We hope you're leaving with fresh insights and a spark of inspiration. Remember to subscribe, leave a review, and check back for more episodes as we dive into new worlds of thought, one book at a time. Until then, keep your mind set in stone and your curiosity open. This has been a Big L Riz Media podcast, where big ideas meet lasting impressions.